The following is a free-for-download audiobook available on Google Drive. From the Hartmann Report's Daily Take Substack. Are Trump and Putin using Gaza as the blueprint to shackle Ukraine? The billionaire strongman plan to hand Moscow control, cripple democracy, and sell out an ally for power and profit. Published August 14th, 2025. The following is a song inspired by this article.
In Ukraine's fields the borders burn, while Gaza cries and the world won't turn. Strong men smile while the children bleed, selling off nations to feed their greed. What happens when psychopaths run the world? When truth is bared and flags unfurled, they trade our futures for power and gold, and call it peace while our freedom's sold. Trump shakes hands, Putin draws the line. Netanyahu signs on the dotted crime. Self-rule they promise, but the locks are tied. It's a prison dressed up in the name of right. What happens when psychopaths run the world? When truth is bared and flags unfurled, they trade our futures for power and gold, and call it peace while our freedom's sold. Stand up, speak out, let the people know. We're the last defense when the tyrants grow. Stand up, speak out, let the people know. We're the last defense when the tyrants grow.
This is what happens when cynical, greedy, amoral billionaires and psychopaths run a country. The Times of London, Murdoch-owned, is reporting that billionaire Steve Witkoff, billionaire Donald Trump, and billionaire Vladimir Putin have worked out a model behind the scenes to solve the Ukraine problem. Just make it like Gaza. They're planning, according to this reporting, to fully respect the borders of Ukraine and the country's sovereignty, but with one catch. Just like Israel did with Gaza, Ukraine can, quote, self-govern, end quote, but all political and economic decisions will be made or approved by Moscow. All funds flowing through Moscow, just like the governments of Gaza and the West Bank, are subservient to the whims of Netanyahu and the Israeli Knesset. It's essentially a plan to return Ukraine to the subordinate status it had when it was part of the old Soviet Union, which Putin appears committed to reestablishing country by country. Trump's senior director for counterterrorism, former Sinclair broadcasting commentator Sebastian Gorka, went all, quote, peace for our time, end quote, Neville Chamberlain, with his apparent endorsement of the idea. Quote, we recognize the reality on the ground, and we have one priority above all else, whether it's the Middle East or whether it's Ukraine. It's to stop the bloodshed. Everything else comes after the bloodshed has been halted, end quote. Meanwhile, NBC News reports that Netanyahu is now moving to stage 2 of his apparent Gaza plan, shipping the citizens of Gaza, who've lived there for millennia, to the hellhole of South Sudan. I say, quote, hellhole from personal experience. I was working in South Sudan about a decade ago with an international relief agency, 15 miles from the Darfur border, distributing food, medicine, and tents to refugees fleeing the Janjaweed murderers. We could see the villages burning on the horizon as desperate people, nearly all women, children, and the elderly, as the military-aged men had all been killed, flooded into the region. Here's an excerpt from the diary I kept during that trip. Quote, the land here in South Sudan is vast and flat. The 45,000 people around me share one single-handed pump well, drilled a decade ago by the United Nations, and no other infrastructure beyond that. No buildings, no roads, no septic or sewage, no schools, no clinics or hospitals, no stores or even storehouses, nothing. Most live on a patch of hard-packed reddish dirt, about 10 feet square, with a few of their possessions marking the perimeters of their, quote, home, end quote, sleeping on the dirt or on a ragged piece of cloth, or, the lucky few, a piece of salvaged tarp from the previous relief mission. Sick, thin women and children with bellies swollen by malnutrition outnumber the men whose peers were murdered by the Janjaweed or taken as slaves to the north. The air is so hot and dry that even smells of body odor vanish. My nose is encrusted with dust. The land is barren of any vegetation at all, other than the occasional large tree with roots deep enough to reach into the water table 30 or so feet below us. Dust devils blow up and around, tiny cyclones that seem to erupt from nowhere amidst air that is so hot and dry it feels as if we've been wrapped in a glass wool insulation and tossed into the furnace's heating duct. One relief worker I met on the way here, who was leaving the Darfur area via Juba, the capital city with only three short paved streets, on the same plane that brought us in, said, quote, if there is a hell, it is much like South Sudan, end quote. This being a refugee community, it is thick with disease, as refugees not only bring diseases with them, but are also among the most vulnerable of all populations to disease. There's Buruli ulcer, a flesh-eating and incurable, other than by surgery, disease caused by a bacteria related to leprosy. I saw a case of it yesterday in a little girl who had just arrived from Darfur. She had a hole in the side of her shin that was about 4 inches long, 2 inches wide, and 3/4 of an inch deep, nearly down to the bone. Ebola was first discovered here and in nearby Zaire. 80% of the world's cases of guinea worm disease are here in southern Sudan. The microscopic eggs are in the guts of tiny, almost invisible sand fleas that infest water and food, and about 3 months after eating one, the worms hatch. Over the course of the next year, they grow throughout the body, often boring out through the skin, causing an ulcer that can take months before the worm fully emerges, causing dreadful and incapacitating pain. There is no cure. In South Sudan, sleeping sickness caused by a parasite called trypanosoma that's transmitted by the bite of local fleas kills more people than AIDS. This is also the world's epicenter of onchocerciasis, another worm that grows about 1.5 feet long inside the body and spreads thousands of eggs to all the organs, soon to become more worms, so that over the decade or so it takes to kill the person. Sometimes the smaller worms may work their way into the cornea, causing blindness, which gives this parasite its common name, quote, river blindness. There's also visceral leishmaniasis, tuberculosis, leprosy, yellow fever, dung fever, various bacteria and mycoplasma that cause severe and deadly forms of pneumonia, and many of the people in this village are infected with malaria, a particularly nasty, drug-resistant, and usually fatal form. P. falciparum is the most common here in southern Sudan, end quote. Following Netanyahu's advice, Trump is also negotiating with South Sudan to take in America's, quote, illegals, end quote, in exchange for cash. They've already taken in 8 people, none of them even Africans, who Trump shipped over there last month. Nice guys, these 2 leaders of Israel and America. Along with Putin, quote, the 3 caballeros, end quote, show what happens when countries are run by entirely self-interested and morbidly rich sociopaths. Forget about commitments, duty, or loyalty. Trump never has, and his entire life, been big on keeping a promise. Just ask his 3 wives, or the thousands of small businesses, workers, and customers he's screwed. So it makes perfect sense that his billionaire land developer buddy Witkoff, who's now negotiating with Putin and Netanyahu, even though he has 0 diplomatic experience, would go along with Putin's great idea to Gaza-ize Ukraine. In fact, in 1994, U.S., Ukraine, Great Britain, and Russia signed the Budapest Accord, an agreement that promised America and Britain would defend Ukraine's borders in exchange for them giving up to Russia what was then the third largest nuclear weapons arsenal in the world, left over from the old Soviet Union. Putin violated when he took Ukraine's Crimea region, and Obama doubled down on the betrayal by largely ignoring the annexation. Biden only reluctantly gave Ukraine aid, and Trump has blocked U.S. military aid for 8 months now. Thus, for the first time since Germany invaded Poland and kicked off World War II in 1939, one European nation has invaded another, seized territory, and claimed it as their own. This violation of international law and national sovereignty clearly doesn't bother Trump or his Republican toadies. Just look at his talk about annexing Greenland or making Canada the 51st state in a dime store imitation of Hitler and Putin. Neither Trump nor the GOP that enables him have any moral compass or core values beyond reestablishing white supremacy, enriching the morbidly rich, and moving women, racial, and religious minorities and the queer community into second-class status subordinate to white, quote, Christian, end quote, men. How else could you explain their behavior? I get it that Trump's former lawyer just yesterday acknowledged that Katie Johnson had alleged Trump raped her when she was only 13 years old, and he'd helped deep six the case. As an adult, she gave sworn testimony in multiple court cases. One transcript published by Politico, quote, defendant Trump initiated sexual contact with the plaintiff at 4 different parties. On the 4th and final sexual encounter with defendant Trump tied plaintiff to a bed, exposed himself to plaintiff, and then proceeded to forcibly rape plaintiff. During the course of this savage sexual attack, plaintiff loudly pleaded with defendant Trump to stop, but with no effect. Defendant Trump responded to plaintiff's pleas by violently striking plaintiff in the face with his open hand and screaming that he would do whatever he wanted. Immediately following this rape, defendant Trump threatened the plaintiff that were she to ever reveal the details of the sexual and physical abuse of her by defendant Trump, plaintiff and her family would be physically harmed, if not killed, end quote. After her testimony, Johnson received a series of death threats from Trump supporters and has since vanished. But will sabotaging Ukraine with a Gaza-like deal and possible eventual resettlement into South Sudan be enough to get us to stop talking about the possibility of the current president of the United States as a child rapist? Or is Trump just selling out Ukraine to get another billion-dollar real estate deal, this time one in Moscow or St. Petersburg? With this administration and the entire Republican Party having lost any semblance of moral core, commitment to democracy, or respect for the rule of law, the responsibility for the preservation of American values falls to us and the Democratic Party. Join your local Democrats and shift the party toward activism. Join Indivisible and any other groups dedicated to restoring democracy to the United States and defending our allies, including Ukraine. Get out on the streets this Saturday and let your elected officials know where you stand. The Congressional Switchboard number is 202-224-3121. Tag, you're it.